today we get you an in-depth look at the all-electric BYD eMAX7 and ride the Kawasaki KLX 230. Hello and welcome to Overdrive. I am Soini Dutt. Let me start by wishing you all a very joyous and prosperous Diwali. The MPV we are starting with today is one that BYD hopes will add to the brand's prosperity quotient in India. The BYD eMAX7 is a premium 6-seater MPV that has an option of a 71.8 kilowatt as well as a 55.4 kilowatt hour battery pack, and the brand hopes that it will eye a piece of the segment that is being dominated by the Toyota Innova. Why are we making such bold claims? Let's find out.
The Toyota Innova has been your only real option if you wanted an MPV for around rupees 30 lakhs. But can the new BYD eMAX7 change that? We'll find out in this video where we tell you how it drives, the kind of features that you get inside, how comfortable it is, and the kind of range that you can expect from this new EV. With the eMAX7, BYD is gunning for a more discerning private buyer, which is also reflected in the styling. So you have a sharper face that is now closer in theme to BYD's newer models. You see this with the segmented LED headlamps, the brushed silver bar where a grille would have been, and the ridged angular patterns in the bumpers. Despite the flash, it still has a simple theme that won't draw many opinions. You notice this in the slightly old-school cap-forward bodywork and glass area. It's not pretending to be an SUV, which is somewhat refreshing. The wheels, however, have been spruced up but are still 17 inches. Ground clearance is a decent 170 mm. The rear is probably the most distinctive with the wide, slightly Audi-like lighting and the full-width signature. BYD has gone a bit easy with the badging this time, which again makes for a simple but effective look. Now with these three-row MPVs, you're always left wondering how much space there actually is for your luggage, and it's not much different with the BYD eMAX7. Now it has a powered boot lid which helps, of course, and with the 3 rows up you have 180 liters, and as you can see that's good for maybe 2 or 3 backpacks. If you want a bit more space, then you can make this backrest a bit more upright, but you can also then fully fold these bits flat, and they're quite easy to do, as you can see. And when you do that, you realize that there's quite a bit more luggage, 580 liters to be precise. Yes, the lip is slightly high, but that's okay. With BYD trying to address a wider market, you have 2 battery options now. The smaller one is a 55.4 kilowatt-hour unit with 420 kilometers of range, while the larger is a 71.8 kilowatt pack with 530 kilometers. These continue to be BYD's proprietary Blade battery tech, so while we didn't manage a full range test, it was clear driving the larger battery pack that you can expect close to 450 kilometers in the real world in regular driving. The battery seems to stay efficient for a wide range of driving situations, and you never really seem to find the need to drive conservatively to maximize range. The fairly accurate range indicator helps with this too. There's quite an MPV-like theme to driving the eMAX7. You have that big sloping windscreen in front of you, this large quarter glass, and that really does help with the cab forward design. It really does help open up the visibility. It's not amazingly good, but it's still nice, and you do get a nice panoramic view out. So again, keeping with the theme, the seats are again quite comfortable. The cushioning is just right, not too soft, not too firm. You're supported in all the right places. There's good under-thigh support, so you will be comfortable if you are behind the wheel for a reasonably long amount of time. First thing that usually catches your eye when you start driving these BYD cars is just how refined and how cohesive the whole drivetrain feels. Of course, performance has taken a big jump over the E6. You now have over 200 horsepower and 310 Newton meters of torque. But yeah, this performance is never unmanageable or rough in its delivery. So when you start off, it's a very smooth, natural flow. And then if you do want to get a move on, as you will see, there is a good dab of performance at hand. You really don't need this much performance in what is essentially going to be a people mover, but it's there. And the good part about it is that it's linear throughout. So even when you're close to say 100 kmph on the highway, you don't feel like it's tapering away, it's becoming a bit lethargic. It's linear and really quite easy to access. This seamless sense goes with the regen too. You have 2 levels of regen on off, and many times you never quite notice the eMAX7 going into regen. The transition from drive to regen to coasting feels mellow and natural as you find in an ICE car, so getting used to the EV experience is very easy. You also get 3 drive modes, but these don't change much of the driving experience. Anyway, given the way this car functions, you won't need to use anything other than the normal mode in most scenarios. Now in terms of how it feels, how comfortable it is, on a steady, smooth road like we're on right now, it's comfortable. Although we did notice that at higher speeds, it can get a bit busy. So especially when the road is not flat, you do notice that you have to make small corrections often. What we would have liked for a bit more is for the ride to have been a bit more pliant, a bit more grown up. You've seen EVs or just cars generally in this price point becoming quite well rounded in how they sort of absorb bumps and so on. But given that this is an EV and you're carrying a big deal of weight, you do notice that over bad roads, over rough surfaces, it can get slightly bouncy. And it doesn't quite cocoon you from the surface as well as it could have or maybe should have. But again, this is not something that is a deal breaker and just something that you might have to consider while owning one of these. The steering is easy enough for the city but doesn't feel too flighty at high speeds, so it's predictable. The low-slung EV mass also makes it competent around bends. It turns without much roll and manages to hide its weight well. It's not especially exciting, but an MPV also doesn't need to be so. It has multi-link rear suspension, which also comes with a good sense of grip. That said, we would have liked better feel from the brakes. There's quite a bit of lightness in initial travel which takes some getting used to.
The eMAX7 impresses once you're inside the cabin as well. More on that after this very short break. Welcome back. Here with us on Overdrive. Price between 29.30 to 29.90 lakh rupees. The BYD eMAX7 has a lot to offer in terms of safety tech and features for the occupants once inside the cabin. Let's take a look.
Now, if you're familiar with the BYD E6, the car that preceded the eMAX7, then the cabin hasn't really changed all that much in terms of its general layout. So it's a simple functional shape. It's not, too flashy or too over the top like the other BYD cars that we know of. So it goes with that whole MPV-ish thing. And while the E6 was quite bare bones, you can say, with a single tone sort of interior theme, there has been some effort at making this place more premium for sure. So while the design itself is quite simple, you have hard materials more or less everywhere. There is a decent kind of quite different texture to it. But yeah, the plastics, they're hard, scratchy materials pretty much everywhere. But I must say that fit and finish levels are good and you have a good heft and sort of quality from all the controls. So for example, the vents, they work well. These indicator stocks, the buttons that are there on the steering wheel, they work like they're from an expensive car. And going with that theme, you also find soft materials on the door trim here, and even on the armrest. But really that premium feeling is most apparent right about here, where you see that you have this big new 12.8-inch touchscreen, and like all of these BYD screens, you have that rotating function to it. We did notice that in the portrait view, the screen blocks visibility somewhat and is generally easier to operate in the landscape mode. Gimmicks aside, this is a top-tier screen. It's responsive and fluid with a logical smartphone-like interface, which makes accessing the many functions within it easy. This helps because all of the climate controls are in here, as is the seat ventilation function. These are always easy to draw up, which is somewhat of a saving grace. Also quick and fluid is the smartphone integration. And then there's this section which again has been redone, and this gear selector, it's different from what was on the E6, and like how I just mentioned for all the controls, it has a high quality feel to it. It's crisp, it works quite precisely, so it's nice to use. And like how it is with BYDs, most of the functions are in the screen, but you have some shortcuts here which do their job pretty well. There is a large space to charge your phone wirelessly, quite a few USB Type A and Type C chargers, and a good storage arrangement in the center console. There's even an SD card reader, but we think the door bins could have held more. A lot of effort has gone into premiumizing this space, but this digital instrument cluster seems out of place. It's been carried over from the E6, and while the MID has been reworked, it still has that slightly old school feel to it. You don't really want analog dials in an EV, and while they do their job, this MID, it's a bit difficult to get used to. You can toggle through, but it doesn't show you too much information, and generally it doesn't quite gel with that whole modern vibe of the rest of the space. Having said that, BYD has loaded the eMAX7 packed full of features. Here's what's on offer. As you can see, getting into the eMAX7 is quite easy. The opening itself is quite wide, and this door opens nearly 90 degrees, so you step quite smoothly inside, and this is the kind of space that you have on offer. Now, To be honest, it's not as big as an Innova High Cross, but the eMAX7 is also a smaller car. It has a wheelbase of 2800 mm. And as you can see, in isolation, it's good enough. I mean, I have pushed this seat to the rearmost position. I can obviously slide it and forward, and there's also a generous recline angle. And as you can see, this is the kind of legroom I have. I can tuck my knees into the front seats, under the front seats, and even with this big sunroof, at least for me, there's a good deal of headroom. So yes, someone over 6 feet tall or closer to 6 feet tall, they might have a problem. Now for the things that I don't like, while the backrest itself is quite supportive for me, it's not tiring over long distances, I do feel like the under thigh support could have been better. Again, it comes from that whole EV architecture thing. The floor is slightly high, so you do sit with a slight lack of thigh support. But you do have a fully flat floor, so there's that functionality, which is great. And then there are a good set of amenities. You don't have a different aircon zone, but you can choose the fan speed. You have two fast charging Type A and Type C ports. A small cubby here, maybe there could have been a wireless charger here, something like that. And some thoughtful pockets here as well for your phones. And I must say the vents are quite effectively placed. Safety has also been given good thought here, as we have seen in other BYD models. Now, one advantage of these seats being just manually adjustable is that you can push them right forward, and getting into the third row is relatively simple. Now, as you can see, it's the usual third row fare in the back of the eMAX7. So for me, it's okay. I'm 5'7", 5'8", and this is the kind of headroom I have. Maybe the headlining could have been scooped out for a bit more space, but it's fine for me. But in that sense, legroom is good. I have enough space here. This seat has been pushed to its rearmost position, and I still have this much. So in that aspect, it's fine. And then you have the usual sort of experience in the third row. Now, this arrangement is not particularly wide, so if you are of a wider frame and there are two people sitting here, it's going to be slightly difficult. And then, of course, you notice that you don't have too much in the way of thigh support. But I have to say that if you aren't too tall and you are an adult, you can do, say, a couple of hours long journey here. It's not going to be very difficult. Now, I would have liked some amenities here. While you do have your own AC vent, there are no charge ports here, which I think is a bit of a miss. You do get a cup holder, and yeah, the seat back, like I showed you earlier, it reclines. Priced at Rs 29.90 lakh for this top-end version, the BYD eMAX7 comes across as a competent MPV. Its EV drivetrain is what will separate it from the competition, which it executes very well. While we would have liked a more comfortable ride and a better second row seat, it has enough going for it in terms of its refinement, space and features to be a strong contender.
Well, it's time to head into our final break here on the show, but coming up on the other side, we'll tell you all about the new Kawasaki KLX 230. Welcome back, you're watching Overdrive. Kawasaki recently unveiled what has become India's first Japanese dual sport motorcycle that happens to be road legal, the KLX 230. Although the pricing of this latest offering hasn't been revealed as yet, we were invited to briefly test the bike's capabilities on the outskirts of Pune city. Here's what Chris took away from the short stint with the bike.
We're out here in the lovely Pro Dirt Adventure on the outskirts of Pune city to check out what has become India's first production level road legal dual sport Japanese motorcycle under 250cc, presenting the new KLX 230 from Kawasaki. This of course is a street legal motorcycle. It's got the headlights, the turn indicators, dash, and of course this one has a sari guard and some pillion foot pegs as well. So that's pretty interesting for a dirt motorcycle, dual sport. You can ride this in the city and you can go hunting your adventurous trails as well on this kind of motorcycle. So that's what this bike is all about. This of course is not the standard model. This is the motorcycle that is kitted out with all the optional accessories, from the knuckle guards that you see out here. Then you have the engine crash guard, you have a skid plate which is plastic, which is kind of strange, and then you also have a panel to protect the chassis from your feet kind of scratching that around. And of course this is not the standard seat. The standard seat height of this motorcycle is quite tall. It stands at around 880 mm, but this lowered seat height brings it down, that figure down by 14 mm. And of course you do get the carriage rack out back here as well. So if you're looking for the price of this motorcycle, we don't have that for you right now because it hasn't been really revealed to us. And the company say that they are going to launch this motorcycle properly somewhere around the first week of December. if we do our maths correctly, that is around when IBW is going to happen. So this motorcycle comes to us as a CKD unit, and it's not a CBU, a complete CBU import like the competition version, spec version of this motorcycle, which is the KLX 230 RS, which is already launched. Now that motorcycle is a steep 5 lakh plus rupees ex showroom. This one, well, of course, this comes as a CKD. It's not going to be as costly, but if you're expecting something, expecting the price to be around the 2 lakh margin, well, you might be kind of disappointed, because we picture this motorcycle to be priced around 3.5 lakhs actually on road. Now let's see how that pans out. But as of now, we have a short while to experience what this motorcycle has to offer. Just 3 motorcycles, around 20 journos, and just 1 day, so really short on time. That's why we're really lucky to have this kind of scenario where we are alone with the motorcycle. That's why we picked this one out here today to actually start off this video. So let's see what this motorcycle has to offer finally. Alright, so the KLX 230 is powered by a single cylinder 233cc air-cooled motor, and of course the power figures of 18 PS and little over 18 Nm of torque seem a bit modest on paper, but then again, in these kind of certain situations when you're riding off-road, in your trails, well, the power seems very adequate because of the weight of this motorcycle. It's so easy to balance and shift around. Now this motorcycle that we're on has the flatter handlebar with the risers. It is a lot better than the standard one. But then again, even the standard model that we've been riding along the course of this day, well, it is really light and nimble. And of course, this is one of the first motorcycles of its kind to get dual channel ABS, and it can be switched off completely. So that's a really cool thing. As far as the ground clearance goes, you have around 265 mm to play with. And as far as your suspension travel goes, you have 240 mm of travel on the fork up front, the Showa fork, and your Unitrack monoshock at the rear, you have around 250 mm of travel. So that is more than sufficient for you to really go attack your trails with ferocity and have a real blast in these kind of outdoor environments. But then again, this is also a dual purpose motorcycle. Now it is supposed to be pretty city friendly as well. Now the tank, of course, is really tiny. It's just like 7.6 liters, and the company are claiming that you can take this motorcycle over 200 kilometers. So that is kind of dicey, but we'll have to figure out if that is really true once we actually have this motorcycle out on the road. You have all the headlight, the indicators. You will have a small bracket up front over here which you can mount your number plate, and the rear you get the same works, which makes it all street legal. Sari God, as you can see, on a dirt bike. Never thought the day would come, but yes, we have arrived, ladies and gentlemen. Now we barely had any time to spend with the KLX 230 on our own on this outing, and were just ushered through 3 supervised courses with barely any time to really run the bike how we saw fit. But for what it's worth, the KLX 230 did feel nimble and light through what we'd subjected it out here today. It didn't feel to be lacking any real power, but in all honesty, the conditions weren't overly challenging. There was also this section which was like a tight, short trail, which was complete with berms and a small jump and everything, where I thought the KLX 230 did quite well. See where you want to go, point the bike in that direction, and this bike will get you there in a jiffy. There was also this section which was covered with small loose stones, where I did wish that the KLX 230 came with the proper knobby tires like that of the competition spec RS version, because with the dual purpose MRF treads on this bike, especially the front, well, it just lost traction practically everywhere. The ride today made me think of a good reason as to why a bike like this makes sense, and another as to why it actually doesn't. Now consider this. The KLX 230 feels like a capable machine given its lovely perimeter frame, the simple SO8C 2-valve engine with a punchy low and mid-range, the 21-inch spoke wheel setup, the Showa suspension and everything. It's really easy to get used to riding this bike as well. Now, if you're new to the entire off-road riding scenario and want to get into it, yes, the KLX 230 does make sense. even though it's slightly more on the expensive side of things. You can ride this bike on road because, well, it has all the bits required necessary to be deemed so, including some app and connectivity features which some nowadays deem a necessity. Better still is that you can hit the trails on your practice runs too and practice your postures, your body positioning, etc. and learn the ropes thoroughly and properly. That's all well and good, right? Alright, now to sum things up out here with the Kawasaki KLX 230, it is a very fun, exciting and very capable machine. Okay, now the pricing of this motorcycle is really going to make or break it, and considering the opposition that this one is going to face in the form of the Hero X-Pulse, well, the 200cc motorcycle, the 4-valve edition, because they are quite similar in terms of power, but then in terms of capability, yes, this motorcycle is very capable as well, but pricing is going to make or break it. And we don't see it coming really cheap. Being brought to India via the CKD route, it's not going to be all that cheap, and we expect a price tag of around 3 to 3.5 lakhs on road. Alright, so what do you think about the KLX 230 from Kawasaki? The prices are going to be revealed later this December in the first week. We presume it's going to be at IBW, but let's see.
We've run out of time on this week's edition of Overdrive, but before we wrap up this week's show, let me once again reiterate, may the light, happiness and warmth of your loved ones make this Diwali even more special.